Juliette may not be trying to escape the silo anymore. She may be walking exactly where someone wants her to walk. And if that is true, then the most important mystery in Silo Season 3 and the events leading into Season 4 is not what Juliette discovered outside. It is who is already watching her before she discovered it. Because look at what the story is actually telling us. Every time Juliette gets closer to the truth, something changes around her. Information disappears. People react before they should know what she knows. Doors open at exactly the wrong moment. And the deeper she goes, the more it begins to feel like someone isn't simply trying to stop her. Someone is studying her. But here's what changes everything. What if Juliette's greatest advantage, her ability to question everything, is exactly what her enemies have been waiting for? What if they didn't create the perfect prisoner? What if they created the perfect observer? And Juliette has been observing the silo, while something else has been observing Juliette. That is the theory. Juliette is being watched far more closely than she realizes, and the purpose isn't simply surveillance. It is behavioral control. Because the people running the silo don't need to know everything Juliette will do. They only need to know what she will do when pushed. And that makes several older moments suddenly look very different. Think about Juliette's entire journey. She was never supposed to become the person who challenges the system. She was supposed to be useful. She was a mechanic, a problem solver, someone who understood machines better than politics, someone who could fix things that other people couldn't even understand. That sounds harmless, until you realize what kind of person that creates. Juliette notices inconsistencies. She notices sounds. She notices damaged equipment. She notices when something doesn't fit. And most importantly, she doesn't accept an explanation simply because an authority figure gives it to her. That makes her dangerous. But it also makes her predictable. Because when Juliette sees a broken machine, she investigates it. When she discovers missing information, she searches for it. When someone tells her to stop asking questions, she asks why. And someone watching her would know that. This is where the theory becomes disturbing. What if certain obstacles were never random? What if some of the doors Juliette opened were deliberately left unlocked? What if certain pieces of information were allowed to reach her? Not enough to expose the entire system, just enough to keep her moving. Because controlled discovery is more powerful than censorship. If you hide everything from someone, they become suspicious. But if you give them a trail, they follow it. And Juliette has been following trails her entire life. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is who put the trail there. Look at how often Juliette's investigation depends on something that feels slightly too convenient. A clue appears. A person knows something they shouldn't. A hidden location becomes accessible. A piece of technology suddenly becomes important. And every discovery seems to push Juliette toward another discovery. That is exactly how a maze works. But the most dangerous mazes aren't the ones without exits. They're the ones where the prisoner is allowed to choose the path. Because then the prisoner believes the choices are their own. And Juliette has always believed she is choosing. She chooses to investigate George. She chooses to challenge Bernard. She chooses to look deeper into the silo's history. She chooses to go where others are afraid to go. She chooses to trust certain people. She chooses to distrust others. But what if someone has been shaping the environment around those choices? Then Juliette's freedom becomes something much darker. An experiment. And this is where it gets darker. Because the silo already has a history of controlling people without physically controlling them. It controls information. It controls movement. It controls communication. It controls what people remember. It controls what people believe is possible. The genius of that system is that it doesn't need chains everywhere. People police themselves. They learn what questions are dangerous. They learn which doors shouldn't be opened. They learn which names shouldn't be spoken. And eventually, the system doesn't have to chase people. People stop themselves. Juliette broke that psychological mechanism. But breaking it may have made her more valuable. Because someone like Juliette can reveal weaknesses that ordinary residents never notice. And if the people behind the silo were smart, they wouldn't immediately eliminate her. They would watch her. They would learn from her. They would see what she touches, who she trusts, what she fears, and what makes her angry enough to act. That changes the meaning of one of the most important things about Juliette. Her stubbornness isn't just her personality. It may be the reason she's still alive. Because if someone wanted Juliette dead, there have been opportunities. But death would end the experiment. Watching her is more useful. And that brings us to the biggest question. Who exactly is watching? The obvious answer is Bernard. But that answer may be too simple. Bernard is powerful, but he is also trapped inside the system. He knows more than almost anyone around him, yet there are clear limits to what even he understands. And if Juliette is being monitored at a deeper level, Bernard may not be the person giving the orders. He may simply be another piece on the board. That's why the technology matters. The cameras, the surveillance systems, the restricted areas, the hidden records, the strange gaps in information. These aren't just world-building details. They establish one fundamental fact. The silo was designed to watch people. So, why would Juliette be different? Why would the system suddenly become blind when she begins uncovering its secrets? It wouldn't. In fact, the opposite is more likely. The moment Juliette became a threat, the amount of attention on her probably increased. And the terrifying possibility is that she may have mistaken surveillance for coincidence. A person appearing at the right moment. A warning arriving before she expects it. A reaction that seems too fast. These moments don't necessarily prove someone is following her. But together, they create a pattern. And patterns are what Juliette understands better than anyone. She is a mechanic. She looks at broken systems and asks what caused the failure. So imagine what happens when she finally realizes that she is part of the system being studied. That could be the real turning point. Because Juliette's biggest mistake may not be trusting the wrong person. It may be assuming that she is the one conducting the investigation. What if she's actually the subject? And what if the people watching her have been waiting for one specific thing? Not her death. Not her escape. Her reaction. Because once they understand how Juliette reacts under pressure, they can predict what she will do next. And if they can predict Juliette, they can control the future of the entire silo. But there's one detail that makes this theory even more disturbing. Juliette keeps surviving situations that should have ended her story. Maybe that's luck. Maybe it's because she's exceptionally capable. Or maybe someone keeps making sure she survives. Because a dead Juliette cannot uncover anything. But a frightened Juliette? A desperate Juliette? An angry Juliette? That Juliette can be studied. And that means the next question isn't whether Juliette is being watched. The question is, what are they waiting for her to discover? Because if every step she has taken has been observed, then the moment she thinks she has finally found the truth may actually be the moment her watchers reveal themselves. And when that happens, Juliette may realize something horrifying. She was never outside the experiment. She was the experiment. And the most dangerous part? She may still be doing exactly what they expected. The most frightening part of this theory is that Juliette doesn't need to see a camera to be watched. The silo itself can watch her. Every restricted door, every surveillance system, every person with access to information, every record that can be altered or erased. The system doesn't need one person standing behind Juliette. It only needs a network designed to notice when she moves. And once you look at Juliette's story through that lens, several events begin to feel less like obstacles and more like controlled tests. Because Juliette has never simply been fighting against one person. She has been moving through a structure designed to predict human behavior. That changes the meaning of Bernard. For a long time, Bernard looks like the ultimate villain because he represents the authority Juliette is fighting against. But what if Bernard isn't the architect? What if he is simply the person closest to the controls? That distinction matters. Because Bernard knows the rules. He knows which information is dangerous. He knows how quickly a rumor can spread. He knows what happens when someone begins asking the wrong questions. But there are moments when even Bernard seems to be reacting rather than creating. And that suggests something bigger exists above him. Something that doesn't need to appear on screen to control the story. Something that doesn't need a face. The system itself. And this is where Juliette becomes uniquely dangerous. Because Bernard understands rules. Juliette understands machines. She doesn't need to know who designed something to figure out that it is malfunctioning. She looks for pressure points. weak connections, hidden mechanisms, places where the official explanation doesn't match reality. That is exactly how she approached the silo. And if someone was monitoring her, they would have learned something very important. Juliette doesn't attack systems directly. She finds the smallest weakness and pulls on it. That's why the story keeps giving her technical mysteries. They aren't just there to make her look intelligent. They are perfectly suited to her psychology. Give Juliette a locked machine, and she wants to know what's inside. Give her a broken system, and she wants to know who broke it. Give her a lie, and she wants to know what the lie is protecting. So, what happens if the people watching her understand that? They can control what she investigates. They don't need to stop every question. They only need to decide which question reaches her first. And that is a terrifying possibility, because the biggest trap isn't giving someone false information. It's giving them true information at the wrong time. A real clue can still become a weapon. A real secret can still lead someone exactly where you want them to go. And Juliette has been surrounded by clues. That's the detail everyone missed. We often assume the mystery of the silo is about missing information. But what if the deeper mystery is curated information? What if the system isn't hiding everything? What if it is carefully choosing what people are allowed to discover? That would explain why some truths seem almost impossible to find while other pieces suddenly become accessible. The silo wouldn't be a wall. It would be a maze. And Juliette would be the person being watched inside it. But here's what changes everything. A maze can be used for two completely different purposes. It can trap someone, or it can test them. And if Juliette is being tested, then every major decision she makes becomes data. Who does she trust? Who does she sacrifice? How far will she go? Will she risk herself for someone else? Will she choose truth over safety? Will she protect the system if protecting it saves innocent people? Or will she destroy the system even if thousands of people could suffer? Those aren't just dramatic character questions. They could be exactly what someone wants to know about her. Because eventually, Juliette may be forced into a decision where there is no correct answer. And that could be the real purpose of watching her. Not to predict her movements. To understand her limits. Think about Juliette's relationship with danger. Most people in the silo have been trained to fear uncertainty. Juliette does the opposite. The more uncertain something becomes, the more she investigates. That makes her extremely difficult to control through fear. So the system needs another weapon. Choice. Give Juliette 2 doors. Let her choose one. Then observe what she does. Give her 2 people to trust. Watch who she chooses. Give her a secret that could save someone she loves, but endanger everyone else. See what she values. This is psychological control at its most sophisticated. The subject believes they are exercising free will, but the environment around them has been engineered. And that creates the major reframe. Maybe Juliette's rebellion isn't proof that the silo has lost control. Maybe her rebellion is proof that the silo's control system is working exactly as designed. Because if the system can predict the rebel isn't truly outside the system. They are simply another variable inside it. And that would make Juliette's escape far more complicated. Suppose she reaches another silo. Suppose she discovers information that completely changes what she believes about the world. Suppose she finally learns who built the system. Would that mean she has won? Not necessarily. Because the person watching her may have wanted her to reach that point. Imagine the psychological horror of discovering that your greatest victory was anticipated years before you achieved it. You thought you were escaping. They knew you would escape. You thought you were exposing the truth. They knew which truth you would find. You thought you were choosing your own path. They built the path around your personality. That's not a prison anymore. That's a behavioral experiment. And Juliette is the perfect subject. Because she is intelligent enough to reach places others cannot. But emotional enough to make decisions based on people she loves. That combination makes her unpredictable, but not impossible to manipulate. And this is where the theory gets even darker. What if the people watching Juliette aren't primarily interested in Juliette? What if they're interested in what Juliette can reveal about human resistance itself? Maybe the silo system has survived for generations because its creators needed to understand one question. How do you keep an intelligent population obedient without destroying its intelligence? You can't simply eliminate every curious person. Eventually, someone will notice. Instead, you allow controlled resistance. You allow people like Juliette to appear. You observe them. You learn from them. And, if necessary, you remove them. That would explain why the system feels so obsessed with information. Information is power. But information about human behavior may be even more valuable. And Juliette is producing that information every time she refuses to obey. Every confrontation teaches them something. Every escape teaches them something. Every alliance teaches them something. Every mistake teaches them something. So when Juliette thinks she is uncovering the silo may be uncovering her. But there is one final piece. The reason this theory becomes truly terrifying is because Juliette's biggest strength could eventually become the weapon used against her. She trusts evidence. She trusts patterns. She trusts what she can physically verify. And normally, that's exactly what makes her dangerous. But what happens when the evidence itself has been selected for her? What happens when every clue she discovers is real, but incomplete? What happens when every conclusion is logical but intentionally leads to the next conclusion? Then Juliette could become trapped inside something much worse than a lie. A truth maze. Every answer would be real. Every discovery would be meaningful. And yet the final picture would still be wrong. That's how you control someone like Juliette. You don't lie to her. You let her become certain. And if someone has been watching her from the beginning, they may already know exactly which truth will make her stop questioning the next one. Which brings us to the most dangerous possibility of all. What if Juliette has already reached the point they were waiting for? What if the next thing she discovers isn't something hidden from her, but something designed specifically for her to find? Because if that happens, the question won't be whether Juliette is being watched. It will be whether the person watching her has finally decided it's time to make her move. And if Juliette really is being watched, then there is one person we have to look at differently. Juliette herself. Because the most important clue may not be hidden inside the silo. It may be hidden inside the way Juliette behaves whenever she gets close to the truth. She becomes more isolated, more suspicious, more willing to act alone. And that sounds like strength. But psychologically, it creates a dangerous weakness. The more Juliette believes that nobody else understands what she has discovered, the easier it becomes to separate her from everyone who could challenge her conclusions. That is exactly what a surveillance system would want. Not necessarily to control her physically. To control the information surrounding her. Because Juliette's greatest weapon has always been other people. Sheriff Holston gave her access to a world she wasn't supposed to see. George gave her a reason to question the official story. Martha gave her technical support. Even people who disagreed with Juliette forced her to reconsider what she thought she knew. Her relationships create friction, and friction creates truth. So, if someone wanted to control Juliette, they wouldn't necessarily attack Juliette. They would attack the connections around her. That is much more effective. Remove one source of information. Discredit another. Make someone appear untrustworthy. Create a conflict between two allies. Suddenly, Juliette is still surrounded by people, but she is effectively alone. And this is where the psychology of the silo becomes crucial. The system doesn't survive because everyone believes the same thing. It survives because people don't know who they can safely trust. Fear creates obedience. But uncertainty creates isolation. And isolation creates mistakes. Juliette has been fighting both. Yet she may not realize how valuable her isolation is to whoever is watching her. Because when Juliette works alone, nobody can stop her from opening the next door. And nobody can tell her that the door was meant to be opened. That is the trap. She thinks independence makes her unpredictable. But independence can also make her easier to manipulate. And here's the part that changes the entire theory. Maybe the watchers don't need to predict Juliette perfectly. They only need to predict what she will refuse to ignore. That's her weakness. If something doesn't make sense, Juliette cannot leave it alone. A hidden message, a strange machine, a restricted file, a suspicious death, a contradiction in the official story. Each one becomes a hook. And once Juliette sees the hook, she pulls. So imagine someone designing a trap specifically for her. They wouldn't leave something obviously suspicious. They would leave something that feels just wrong enough. Something that only a person like Juliette would notice. And then they wait. She investigates. She digs deeper. She follows the evidence. And without realizing it, she walks into the next stage. That means the greatest threat to Juliette may not be a person standing behind a control panel. It may be the architecture of the mystery itself. Because whoever designed this system understood something terrifying about human beings. People will accept almost any prison, as long as they believe they are choosing their own way out. And Juliette has always believed she is choosing. That's why her story is so compelling. She isn't simply fighting a government. She isn't simply uncovering a conspiracy. She is fighting against the possibility that her own decisions have been anticipated. And that brings us back to Bernard. Because perhaps Bernard's greatest fear isn't that Juliette will discover the truth. Maybe his greatest fear is that someone else wants Juliette to discover it. Think about what happens when someone inside a controlled system begins acting outside the rules. The natural response is to eliminate the threat. But if Juliette is being observed as part of something larger, elimination would be premature. She is still producing information. She is still revealing weaknesses. She is still showing how a person reacts when the rules collapse. So perhaps Bernard's hesitation isn't weakness. Perhaps he knows that killing Juliette could destroy something far more important. A test. A long-term experiment. A way of measuring whether the silo can survive someone like her. And that would explain why Juliette repeatedly finds herself at the edge of destruction without completely disappearing. Someone may need her alive. Not because they care about her. Because she is useful. And this is where it gets darker. What if Juliette isn't the first person to be watched this closely? What if the silo has been doing this for generations? What if every rebellious person before her was also studied? Some disappeared. Some were silenced. Some became part of the system. And perhaps the system has been collecting behavioral patterns for decades. What makes people rebel? What makes them surrender? What makes them lie? What makes them sacrifice themselves? What makes them choose one person over thousands? Juliette could be the latest and most successful subject. But maybe she's different. Because unlike the others, Juliette doesn't just want to escape. She wants to understand. And understanding the system is far more dangerous than escaping it. An escapee can be replaced. A person who understands the mechanism can destroy it. That's why the surveillance theory ultimately leads somewhere much bigger. The people watching Juliette may not be trying to stop her from leaving. They may be trying to make sure she reaches the correct conclusion. Because the wrong conclusion could create chaos. But the right conclusion could reveal the entire architecture. And perhaps that is why the story keeps surrounding Juliette with contradictions. The contradictions aren't mistakes. They're pressure points. They're designed to force her deeper. And if that is true, then the audience has been looking at the wrong mystery. We've been asking, what is outside the silo? But maybe the better question is, who decides what Juliette is allowed to learn about it? Because those are completely different mysteries. One is about the outside world. The other is about control. And control is what Silo has always been about. The cameras, the rules, the forbidden history, the cleaning ritual, the hierarchy, the restricted information. All of it serves the same purpose. Keep people inside a reality they didn't create. Juliette is dangerous because she can see the edges of that reality. But what if the system has already adjusted to her? What if someone knows she will keep digging? What if they know she will reject the easy explanation? What if they know she will risk everything for the people she loves? Then Juliette isn't fighting blind. She's fighting against an enemy that may understand her better than she understands herself. And that leads to the final reveal. The person watching Juliette may not be waiting for her to make a mistake. They may be waiting for her to make the one decision they cannot predict. Because every system has a weakness. Every model eventually encounters something it cannot calculate. And Juliette's greatest value may be that she is capable of doing something irrational for one simple reason. She cares. She will risk herself for another person. She will break rules because someone is in danger. She will walk into darkness because someone she loves might still be alive. That emotional unpredictability could be the one thing the system cannot fully control. And perhaps that is why Juliette has survived. Not because she is smarter than everyone. Not because she is stronger, but because the people controlling the silo fundamentally misunderstand one thing. They understand fear. They understand obedience. They understand punishment. But they may not understand sacrifice. And sacrifice is impossible to predict when someone has nothing left to lose. So imagine the moment Juliette finally realizes she has been watched. Imagine her discovering that someone has been tracking every major decision, every investigation, every alliance, every escape. And then imagine her realizing something even worse. The Watchers aren't surprised by what she has done. They were waiting for her to do it. That would be the ultimate psychological trap. Because Juliette would suddenly have to question everything. Was the clue real? Was the person trustworthy? Was the escape planned? Was the information deliberately exposed? Was her greatest victory actually another test? And once she begins asking those questions, there is no going back. Because surveillance changes a person's relationship with reality. You stop asking, what is true? You start asking, who wanted me to believe this was true? And that is exactly where Juliette could become more dangerous than ever. Because once she understands that she is being watched, she can start watching back. She can feed the system false behavior. She can create decisions that appear predictable. She can make the Watchers believe she is following one path while secretly preparing another. And if Juliette learns how to manipulate the people manipulating her, the entire balance changes. The prisoner becomes the observer. The experiment becomes an interrogation. And the watched person starts watching the Watchers. That could be the real evolution of Juliette's story. Not another escape. Not another rebellion. A psychological war. And the final question becomes terrifying. If Juliette discovers that someone has been watching her all along, will she try to escape the silo? Or will she deliberately stay inside long enough to find out who has been watching her? Because if she chooses the second option, then season May 4th not be about Juliette escaping the system. It may be about Juliette turning the system against itself. And when the Watchers finally realize that their subject has learned how to watch them back, they may discover the one thing they never planned for. Juliette was never the easiest person to control. She was the person who was always going to find the machine behind the walls. And once she finds that machine, the question won't be whether she can break it. The question will be, what happens when the person who has been watched the entire time finally decides to watch back?